Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 595th episode of Constructed Chrism. I'm your host, Mason, joined by my co-host, Abe Stein. Abe, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Even after the post Magic tournament on the Spring Forward weekend, fatigue. I'm still kicking.
This is like, I hate missing a spotlight and that sort of thing, right? I ended up doing some birthday stuff with my family instead of going to the event. I almost like last second went, but this is also the first time I think in 3 years or 4 years where there's been like a big Magic thing on the daylight savings time, and not having to engage with it was just so nice. I had a little Riftbound tournament on Saturday. I woke up on Sunday, did some family stuff. It wasn't the end of the world. It was so nice.
Yeah, I'm feeling it, Mr. Krabs.
That's fair. Well, speaking of feeling it, I mean, this standard format is so good. We are, in the last month or so of RCQ season when it comes to this format, but we had a bunch of big events over the weekend, and we wanted to talk about this episode and talk about standard this episode and do one of our classic power ranking episodes and really just go through the top 10 archetypes and really sort of, discuss them here and help prep y'all for your local RCQs. I believe you have until the release of Strixhaven, then we're switching over to Modern, so get excited for that if you love Modern. But that's still like a month and a half, Abe, which, don't think about how quickly that means Strixhaven's coming, of lots of standard action, and the format's really diverse.
Yeah, I mean, it's big credit to this current standard format. I think it's finally at the place where when trying to pick a deck, I'm like, they're all good, it's hard to say like, oh, this is the only choice, because you can look at the room and say, oh yeah, this is a metagame where maybe I'd want this or that, and there's so many good viable decks. I think they did a really, really good job. It's been a while since we've had that. A lot of people love when the format is wide, and we have that. So.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. And in fact, as we start off here, I think the first stuff we're going to talk about, I feel like was the one thing missing. It kept coming up in coaching very weirdly. It wasn't around, so I'm excited to talk about it here in a second. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're doing this. So, we used to do the power ranking episodes exactly like Frank Karsten's old model from like, I want to say the mid 2000s. And about a year ago, I kind of petitioned that we change the model a little bit and we sort of flatten out the points, because before, first place was like a disproportionate amount of points. Maybe not disproportionate, but it was top heavy, let's say. And it led to some very like interesting things, and us having, I think, given more caveated and more like weird discussion of like, hey, this deck's in third place when it comes to like all the points across the weekend, but all that comes from winning two events. And how much do you value like winning versus like getting second place, right? Like I know for me personally, Abe, like that, those are basically the same result, right? It's one match of Magic, right? And obviously you get a little pedantic if you keep, extrapolating that forever, but sort of having the finals be so top heavy, we've changed it up a little bit, which has its own pluses and minuses. And I know that, we've seen some feedback from people, and we're always trying to improve this. And so maybe we'll look back and try to optimize this more. But we're basically looking at how decks did from the RCs over this past weekend, sort of seeing, their performances, and across the top 32, which is where for the United States you qualify for the Pro Tour, and for other regions it's still a solid finish to you're still qualifying depending on what region you're in. And we're going to discuss those decks here today.
Yeah, not just the RC, but also the Spotlight. I want to give a huge shout out to Spencer, who unfortunately could not join us because of a family thing this week, but he did a lot of work putting this together. And, these are just the numbers, no opinions. This is all results. You can go and do it yourself if you want to, check his work. But yeah, we got 10 decks ranked here, the top 10 decks in Standard. So, Mason, why don't you get us kicked off?
Yeah, number 10 is going to be the mono white, in parentheses, Momo deck. This is a deck that popped up on Magic Online, I want to say about a week and some change ago. And this was like the one thing I think Standard was missing. We didn't have like a mono white aggro-y deck, and this isn't a perfect aggro deck. It does go wide. This is a deck that I think is probably a little slept on because it also popped up so late. For a lot of people's preparation, right? Like this would be, you need to be pretty confident this is one of the better things to be doing, to swap to this compared to a deck you have a lot more reps with. But it's doing some really powerful things. Abe, what do you think about this deck?
Yeah, I think this deck is really sweet. It's a very good usage of a lot of the powerful white cards in standard. I think this deck really came about. I don't know how you feel about this, Mason, but just as like a um, the Izzet Prowess killer. You
Yeah.
know, like it was really designed to say, okay, this is uh, you want to kill me with otters and slickshot show offs. Good luck fighting through all this.
Hmm.
Um, and it really is about a lot of rectangles, using some really cool cards that are powerful and underrepresented in the format to have that angle of attack. It's called Momo Drum because those are like the biggest early mana engines in the deck. Being able to use Momo and Springleaf Drum to like two spell and to continually just churn out threats, and make the most out of Cosmic Grand Zenith. Um, I think there's probably room for this archetype to improve as well. Talking to someone in Richmond who took this deck and was trying it with Quantum Riddlers, as just like a hey, my deck is kind of in need of more cards. I feel like I get run out of gas sometimes. What's a good way to fix that? Uh, how about some Quantum Riddler? So there's room for this shell, I think, to continue to improve. And yeah, cool to see it showing up on the weekend.
Yeah, it's really awesome. I mean, one of the things that has I think really impressed me and has been like a selling point to Boros Dragons is Momo, right? Like Momo for flyers is Llanowar Elf, and sometimes more, right? In Boros Dragons, you typically play one dragon a turn, right? So it's not like you're getting a ton out of Momo. But I mean, if you go turn one Springleaf Drum, turn two, you can play Momo into Sage of the Skies, right? Like that is a really powerful turn two play. And that's just something that like you get access to with this sort of deck. Similar things with like Starfield Shepherd, right? You can either warp a Starfield Shepherd and then play the one you got if you went turn one drum, or you have your Momo out and then it costs white, and then you play something else, right? Like maybe a Novice Inspector or a Nurturing Pixie. You can pick back up that Starfield Shepherd and start to go infinite. So has the ability to kind of beat up on the Izzet Prowess decks, but also has a lot of grind to it. And Cosmic Grand Zenith is a card that, when it first came out, a lot of people were really hyped for. We saw some play in the Esper Pixie deck, but kind of fell off. Deck didn't really survive too much longer after that. And this is like probably the best Cosmic Grand Zenith deck I've seen. And this deck has been quite impressive when I see it played. I personally haven't played with it too much yet. I watched a friend play on Discord a little bit and backseated a bit, but this deck is good. And if I was playing an event coming up, this would be one of those decks that I would want to put time in. And I love the idea of Quantum Riddler in this deck when you brought it up. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, this seems like, yep, that's a good include for this deck. Maybe pick up some Spider Senses for the sideboard, help out with some problems in that vein, call it a day.
Yeah, and looking at the win rate data on MTG decks, just to kind of put it into context, it does have a very good spread against the Izzet decks, of many kinds, Prowess, Lessons. It's also pretty against Rhythm and Dimir. So yeah, it's cool to see it have just a unique take on the format that's a bit polarized, I'll say, when you go and look over it. And it's still a small sample size because the deck's cropping up for the first time, but definitely room to kind of patch up those holes once you know what they are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next up is Jeskai Control. I mean, this deck hasn't changed much. I guess that's, to be fair, it feels like there's one or two builds and people are kind of playing those over and over again. And I think with every Jeskai Control deck, you always see people have their own little flair. But this deck hasn't changed a whole bunch in my estimation, Abe. And I think it's solid. It is like a good deck in standard. Like you mentioned, there aren't any decks where I'm like, oh, this is awful. And in fact, kind of glancing here at the top 10 decks, all of these decks, if you told me, you were paying for my intro and I had to play one of these decks, I would, take that deal, right? Like, I think I could do well with any of these decks. So, yeah, it's totally solid deck. It's a little uninspiring to talk about. If you love Jeskai Control, I'm sorry that I don't have a ton to say about it. But for me personally, good deck and totally reasonable to play.
Yeah, I think that part of the reason Jeskai control. I mean, if you talk about it before Pro Tour Lauren Eclipse, it's like, that maybe people had no belief in it. I mean, it wound up putting a copy in the top 8. But I think the deck just doesn't have the same amount of favorable matchups that it did back maybe in like Portland, where the Cub decks were, the most played by a lot. But that doesn't mean the deck isn't still, capable of fighting. I think, but maybe between like that and Nursery has led to its slow decline in the format. It's main deck Rest in Peace also not as good into like, a world where reanimator decks are not so in vogue.
Yeah. And some of these other decks have some tools that can really outvalue and outgrind these sort of decks. And honestly, Izzet Lessons in my mind is kind of like the control deck du jour. At least that's where I'm sitting with it, right? And so it is hard to sort of, I think, play this deck where you're a bit clunkier. Your cards can, they're stronger. Like Jeskai Revelation is a really powerful card. Like Shiko can be a very powerful card. But at the end of the day, this isn't just the control deck that I think is normally optimal, but it does have some selling points over the overdeck. I don't want to be too reductive in comparing two control decks, or controlling decks, I should say.
Yeah, this is also definitely a more, like, one thing about Lessons is you don't get to play Day of Judgment. You don't get to play Ultima. Like, when those cards are good, this deck is really good.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. A Dimir Excruciator coming in here, 6 points, and this is the deck that won the Pro Tour. I am surprised, traditionally in Magic, Abe, I've always told people if a deck wins a Pro Tour, it is going to have disproportionate, like, people showing up with it for the most part for a long time, and it feels like that hasn't happened in the same way with Dimir Excruciator. It's a good, powerful deck, it's had some small innovations for sure. But it's still mostly the deck that we saw win the Pro Tour, and it's still quite good, but it's not, I think, the best thing going on in the format by a mile, but it is a good thing going on in the format.
Definitely. I mean, the deck has continued to have a lot of play. Like looking on Goldfish, it's still in the top 5 most played decks. Making up 7.5% of the metagame.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not nothing. I think the deck just has not continued to perform well. It was a deck that kind of like Jeskai, right? The best cards in Jeskai are like, Day of Judgment comes to mind. And there's not, right, that card's not as good. Devious Cover-Up, not as good. Your B plan is not as strong as it once was, and decks have kind of adapted to Deceit and the way that it took the format by storm. And yeah, I think that it's just kind of suffering from the current state of the metagame, but it's still a strong deck, still able to put up finishes. Just maybe not, not holding on as well. The format definitely adapted.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say here. Like, I think you kind of nailed it there. Like, people have just, they've gotten better at playing against these cards. Their decks have been built in ways to be better against these cards. And, it's still a fine deck. It wouldn't be my first choice, but once again, I wouldn't be upset to be playing Dimir Excruciator. Bant Rhythm. I'm really curious what your thoughts on this one are, Abe, as it's our next deck. And this is a deck that feels very divisive and polarizing among players about whether, you should play this or play, blue-green rhythm or 4-color, or even should you even be playing a rhythm deck. And at least where I'm sitting with it right now is sort of like, if you think mono green is the best deck, this is a powerful proactive deck that beats up on mono green, has a fine Izzet Lessons matchup, if you think that's like one of the other 2 top decks. And yeah, you have some polarizing matchups, but you also have like draws that beat everybody. And personally, I'm such a mark for those decks. You know this, Abe. It's like, yeah, my matchup isn't great, but also I can go Elf, Cub, something next turn you're dead. So prove it to me. You know what I mean? But what are your thoughts on Bant Rhythm?
Yeah, I think that, you kind of mentioned there some people prefer the traditional Simic. Why play Bant? I think that Prowess is a big reason to play Bant. I think that the Gear Hulk package gives you a lot in ways of like actually being able to combat what they're doing. Because when you can power into a Gear Hulk instead of having to power into Crater Hoof to win, but just like, stall up the ground, Gear Hulk for some interaction, and then take over the game, you have a much better chance than when you're Simic. And I think that you're very weak to tempo and removal spells on your dorks early. So yeah, I mean, I think that so much of the format and where the rhythm decks are suffering comes from the fact that, like we said, all these decks are decks that were represented at the Pro Tour, right?
Mhm.
All these decks are decks that, some of them even were born out of a metagame that was predicated on, we have to beat Cub.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't beat Badgermole Cub, this deck should not be in our sights. And that's tough to then go from that and say, okay, well, all the decks people are playing right now, they started at the foundation of playing by the rule of engagement of beat my deck. So if anything, I say it's kind of impressive just how much it's held on. Like, you'd think that if everyone came out and said, okay, we're just going to beat up this one archetype and this one card, and every deck I play is going to be respecting that, that it wouldn't be able to put up numbers nearly as often as it does.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. It's a really good testament to this deck's just raw power. And I think also just the raw power of like dorks, right? Ross Merriam top 8 at the Spotlight over the weekend, and he sort of tweeted like, welcome to standard Spirebluff Canal versus Llanowar Elf, right? And so far in our power rankings, that hasn't been super true. That's going to become much more true for basically everything else we talk about from this point forward outside of one deck. But like, Elf is just really, really good. And there's a reason why, like, when it first got announced in Foundations, I think you, me, and Spencer were all like, wait, like, is this an outlier in Foundations or is this the baseline? Because, like, if, every card in Foundations had been as powerful as Llanowar Elf or relatively as strong, that set would be absurdly powerful, right? Like, Elf is just such a backbreaking card and puts so much pressure on a format. It's not, insurmountable. We've seen Llanowar Elf, be part of standard now for closing in on 2 years, and it hasn't been a huge issue until Badgermole Cub came out. But it is just a really strong card and really shows just like how good mana cheating can be. Once again, similar to Momo, right? In that Boros Dragon's deck, I think being really subsidized by that card.
Yeah, I think it's pretty telling that the format is split between ways to either be Llanowar Elf or like Llanowar Elf, and ways to kill Llanowar Elves on turn 1.
Yep. Speaking of that sort of thing, we're hitting our Izzet snowstorm of just back to back to back. First up is Izzet Elementals. This is the, like Ashling, Roaming Throne type deck. I'm going to try and clarify all these Izzet decks because there are just so many of them. And this is one that, I was higher on when it first came out of the Pro Tour. It was a deck that I thought was quite good. I crafted it on Arena, played it some, was like, okay, this is totally solid. It has unimpressed me as time's gone on, and I think it's an example of like, yeah, it is totally solid. You can totally win with that deck, but it is just not the best thing going on by a lot in the standard format. And a lot of other decks I think just overpower it, but it is like still a good deck, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think also it's a bit of a misnomer to call this an Izzet deck when it is kind of a 4-color deck. It's like
Izzet Frank Carson for that one.
Yeah, it's Izzet with like 2 splashes. It's really a 4-color deck. But it is a really it's still a really solid deck. It's doing some really powerful stuff. Like Deceit's still really good. Roaming Throne plus Deceit and also Sunderflock are like, you have a really, really powerful end game. None of your cards are very bad.
And you do cheat a lot of mana too, right? Like Flame Braider and Ashling in this deck are both basically Badgermole Cub, right?
Yeah, you have a lot of ways to get ahead of curve for yourself. I think that Ashling especially is one of the most innocuous cards in the format, but like it's basically a mana dork on turn 2 that also is 2 mana dorks on turn 3, right? Like or like you're able to go to 4 mana on turn 3 and 6 mana on turn 4 on one card. If you're playing big spells, and this deck is playing big spells, and it really pays off while also filtering your draws, and just it does a lot. I think that the thing about it though is that while this deck does a lot, it's not very flexible.
Mhm.
I don't know if you feel that way about it,
I
Mason.
yeah.
And the format has gotten it's also not really streamlined. It's able to cover a broad range by playing just right. It has this game plan of I'm just going to cast these cards that are really good. It's very mid rangey in that way, but it's not hyper consistent in doing any one thing. And like if its best thing is casting Sunderflock, there are other decks that maybe are better at finding and casting Sunderflock. If its best thing is doing deceit stuff, there are other decks that are better at doing deceit stuff. So it kind of suffers there, but it definitely still has legs.
Yeah. I think one thing that's helped me contextualize this deck is like when your opponent has their average draw, your average draw just overpowers them a lot of the time. Right? Or maybe like you're slightly above average draw. And like the card Vibrance, I think goes a long way to like helping this deck too. Like I found like if my deck is weak to Vibrance, I find I typically really struggle against this, 4-color elemental deck. It's like, gosh, pretty big body, killed one of my guys when it came down. That's assuming no throne, right? Golly, that was really good off of Flame Breeder on turn 3. So that's at least been how I've kind of, parsed this deck.
Yeah, I think it's like the best version of a like I'm going to cast good threats mid-range deck, right? Like if you're someone who loves the Siege Rhinos of the world, this is what the Siege Rhinos of the world look like in 2026. Is like I'm going to cast Deceit and recoil your thing, or I'm going to cast Vibrance and go get a land that's going to get me some value and kill your creature, and like here's my 2-for-1 guys and mana generators to do it.
Yep. Next up is Izzet Prowess. This deck, has been doing very well so far. It had a great weekend, I think, kind of across the board, but some other decks, had a lot more representation as well that did well. So it's sort of in the middle of our pack here. But Izzet Prowess is very strong, and is one of those decks that, like, I think people disrespect a little bit too much. Like, I've seen a lot of people be like, oh, it's like the middle Izzet deck, if that makes sense. Like, the most, like, it's not the worst, but it's not the best. And this deck does some really powerful and proactive things and puts a lot of this format to a test.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I kind of expected, and I think a lot of people expected this deck to place higher on a power rankings. I mean, if you look at the metagame breakdowns, this deck was in the top 3 decks played at most RCs and at the Spotlight. And for it to only come in at 5th, I think says a lot either about the ability of the format to adapt to Izzet Prowess, or just about, there's something else going on there in terms of what makes this deck good or have good finishes. Like I will say of the 10 finishes that the deck did have in our data, like 6 of those were top 8s. So like, and 2 top 16s and 2 top 32s. So the players who did really have success with Izzet Prowess and put points up, they did it, with really strong finishes. But to see a deck that was that heavily played only have that much representation definitely means it's far from the, best deck in the format. Absolutely have to drop everything to play. This is one of many Izzet decks that that is being played, and it has its place.
Totally. Next up is Dimir Midrange, sort of tied here in the 5th/4th place. Dimir Midrange, I mean, Abe, this is just, creatures and interaction and Kaito and curiosity, right? It's the same song and dance we've been doing since the release of, gosh, I forget the name of the set now because there's so many in Standard. The House of Horrors.
Duskmourn,
thank you, yeah. That set came out. We got Kaito Curiosity, and this deck has been basically the same when it comes to the structure since then. Obviously, it's a bit of hyperbole. We've had cards like Preacher and Tidebinder and Glenendra and all these other things move around. But at the end of the day, it has been the, Kaito, Enduring Curiosity, the deck. It is very popular. It is totally solid. I think it is often not the best thing to be doing, but a thing you can be doing. Maybe should be doing is the best way I should describe this. Like, I never have felt like Dimir midrange is what you should do, but I've always felt like it's a thing that you probably has some varying degrees of can do. Um, I don't know how you feel about this deck, but I mean, when this deck draws Curiosity and Kaito and plays them and protects them, it's just like feels unbeatable. And when you don't, I do feel like you're playing a bit of an underpowered standard deck.
I am very surprised to see this deck where it is, because every time I look at uh, the data for Dimir, it just doesn't seem like it has good matchups against anything else.
Yeah,
I don't know if you feel that way. Like, I feel like it's not good into many of the Izzet decks.
mm-hmm.
It's not like it's actively not good into Prowess. It's not good into Landfall.
It's not that good into the rhythm decks either. Like,
yeah, it's not good into Lessons. It does really beat up a lot of the decks we've already talked about, except for maybe like Momo Drum.
Yeah, I think Momo Drum probably is pretty good against it. I could totally believe too that Momo Drum players are still like optimizing their decks, and there's probably some awkwardness in figuring out how to play versus Dimir. So maybe it's even hurting their win rate against them, right? And I honestly I feel like the Dimir midrange versus Mono Green Landfall, I don't really mind being on Mono Green Landfall in some of the configurations. I know some people have said Dimir midrange, like part of the reason to play it is to beat up on Mono Green. Uh, but you know, depending on how Green's built their deck, I just don't feel like that's how it actually goes a lot of the times. And that could just be Mono Green having these really strong draws and Dimir having, you know, these peaks and valleys and me not getting down to the details enough. But I agree with you. It is weird. And also, historically, Dimir is a little lower on our list, too. So there's also could have been a particularly good weekend with some particularly strong players coming out and really repping the deck.
Yeah, I was going to say it is hard to use aggregated data when you're talking about, right? And that's a good thing with the power rankings, right? Is like when you have a deck like this that maybe surprises compared to what the data says, it makes you ask the question, like, what did the players who, right, like, Dimir is in fourth, it puts 7 players in top 8s. Like, what did those 7 players do? And looking at the deck lists really, you know, and breaking that down is a really good exercise in, you know, figuring out, well, what did all those Dimir players do? Or, you know, what didn't their opponents do, right? Did they maybe have a good matchup spread, or did their metagame not have so much, you know, Lessons or Landfall or something that's traditionally a bad matchup? Like, what made it so that they could be successful?
Yeah, and then even looking at like oh my gosh, my brain broke here. The melee data, because we can also see these events like who they're playing against too, right? And you know, sometimes I'd be like, oh yeah, you played only 2 bad matchups and you won one, right? And so, you know, I'm not saying you should always lose your bad matchups, but I think for like if you're going to win a tournament, I always tell people in coaching, Abe, you have to win a matchup you're supposed to lose, and you're supposed to win the ones you're supposed to win, right? And like, you know, sometimes that's just how it goes. It's like, oh, I've had plenty of tournaments where there's a bad deck in the field. It's 10, 12% of the field, and I play it once across 15 rounds. That's just totally reasonable. That just happens, you know, especially if maybe that deck's being targeted a lot, right? So it doesn't maybe sift towards the top. So, you know, there's an alternate reality, Abe, where Magic is a much, much more popular game, and we can do this full time. And CC releases daily mini episodes, and we break down, you know, all these sort of things, right? It's like we got a week of content from, you know, this sort of thing. We talk about each of the different Dimir mid-range decks and what the pros and cons are, right? But that's not the world we live in. But you're right. You should really take a look at those decks and see what they're doing. That might be really helpful for your local metagame. And maybe your metagame is also different and you don't want to adapt to sort of, you know, what these people are doing, right? I know plenty of people who are like, yeah, I have no mono green players in my local area, like maybe one. And it's like, well, your sideboard should probably look a little different, you know? So just something to keep in mind. Next up is Izzet Spellmentals. And I believe this is the deck you played at the event, Abe. So I really want to hand you the mic here.
Yeah, so Izzet Spellmentals comes in at third with 14 points, 9 top 8s, 2 top 16s, and 3 top 32s. Yeah, I mean, I chose to play this deck at the last minute instead of Landfall just out of comfort. But, you know, for those not familiar, but at this point, the deck is is Hearth Elemental and Sunderflock and Eddie Crab and a bunch of, cheap spells to make those things very, very cheap themselves. The biggest draw to this deck, I think, this weekend was that while it is not, it's not great into Lessons, it's fine into Lessons, but it's not excellent. And I think really good Lessons players can really could really pick it apart. It was close against Landfall, and it was definitely good against Prowess. I think it's looking at the Prowess lists that did succeed, a lot of them I think were really prepared for this matchup by just saying that the best card for the Izzet mirrors was to have 2 or 3 Eddie Crabs.
Yeah.
In part because of how good they are in this matchup specifically. And so, if the card's really good against Izzet Prowess, the fact you're playing 4 of them in your main deck definitely helps on a weekend where, Izzet Prowess was among the decks to beat. So the matchup spread was pretty good for it. It definitely had some strong results. I had a lot of, many members of the Riptide Project wound up playing it. One of them got 10th. Another 2 of them, I think, got in the top 32 or top 64. I myself didn't have a great event, but I also played against a lot of the decks towards the bottom half of the power rankings that are definitely good in the Spellmentals. So yeah, I don't know. You feel Mason about this deck? I think that it's probably going to start declining in positioning again as its own popularity is known, and as the kind of Lessons uptick. But if people are playing Prowess near you, figuring out a plan for them having any Crabs is probably the best way forward, to make sure you can still continue to be really favored in that matchup. But the deck is definitely good into the field that was just happened last weekend.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense to me about everything that was being said there, especially the crab mirror thing playing out, right? When I first saw that in those deck lists, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And then kind of what you're saying here really makes it kind of round out in my mind. I think Spellmentals is strong. It's sort of a deck that was birthed right to slay rhythm decks and Badger Mole Cup decks in general. And then it kind of suffered from its own success. And I also think people maybe were a little too worried about it suffering from its own success, right? I remember a lot of people right after the Pro Tour were Team the Boulder had, a generational run with this deck, 71% versus the field, but we lost a lot of our good matchups, and there was also maybe a thought that the rhythm decks were just dead after the PT, right? So I wonder, has this deck just been slept on by a lot of players and haven't been adopted in the same way that it should be? You mentioned it being sort of, good for this weekend. What made you identify that as maybe something for listeners at home to be something they can look out for and maybe replicate in the process in the future for other decks?
Yeah, I think that what made it really good for the weekend was coming into it, I thought the 3 most played decks were going to be Prowess, Landfall, and Lessons. And I feel kind of in the order of, I think, Landfall, Prowess, Lessons. I thought Lessons was going to be the 3rd most played deck, and the other 2 were going to split the top 2. So looking at that, I felt like I was going to have a deck that was good into the best 2 decks, had a strong game plan, and knew what it wanted to do in all those matchups. Even if it wasn't favored against Landfall or favored against Lessons, I felt like it was good to be close, and I thought that it was strong enough and correct enough to be good against the rest of the field. I was not going to feel like there were many matchups there that I could not beat, just because of the power of my deck, and there were compelling reasons to say I am very strong into what I think it will be the most represented deck, and I'm not sure I'm finding decks that I think are as strong into Prowess as this deck is. So that's what kind of led me there. I also, like I said, I think that if I had a Hyperbolic Time Chamber, or maybe even just 3 more quality days of testing, I probably would have pulled the trigger on Landfall instead. But I still was fine with where Spellmentals was, and had more reps with it, and felt more comfortable with it. So I wound up sticking to that.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. Next up is Izzet Lessons. I think, this is the Izzet deck that when people talk about Izzet, this is the one I think people shorthand to a lot. It obviously won Worlds in the hand of Seth Manfield. It has ebbed and flowed in the metagame. It had a really good weekend when it comes to sort of our points here coming in at second. Izzet Lessons is quite strong. And I think one of the things I've really come to appreciate about Izzet Lessons, Abe, is that it is both a control deck, right? Like you can run your opponent out of things, but also the fast draws in combination with that are really tricky for your opponents to play around. I think a lot of people, it's hard to have great sideboard plans that can kind of stop both halves of it that aren't just like a pile of annuls, which also I feel is not good enough these days to really KO this deck.
Yeah, the deck is just really good in the right hands. It does a lot to like when it gets ahead, it has a habit of killing you very quickly. Like some of the best advice I got from just talking to some really accomplished Lessons players before the event was that what they see most people do is probably not drain their opponent as quickly as they should, because it's a lot easier to deal like 12 damage than it is to do 15 damage. And so if you maybe don't take that treasure token to be a bit safer or don't draw another card, like most of the time with that deck, you win with cards in your hand and you lose with cards in your hand. So you probably can just take a trigger or two to actually put them in range to say, okay, well, here's a second monument. Let me trigger them both on my turn. On your turn, let me cast the spell with my artist talent and trigger it on your turn as well. So yeah, I mean, the deck is obviously really good. It is not going anywhere. I think that it's also really hard to, as much as you can try to shut it down with cards like Soul Guide Lantern or like Rest in Peace or these annuls, like it has ways to move around that, and you don't ever really take everything away from it with those cards. You know what I mean? Like the deck has, if you're attacking it with like annuls and naturalizes, well, I still have accumulated wisdom, so I can still pull ahead. I can still find ways to get up cards and using like Stormchaser's talent and these things to generate advantage, even if I don't have my monuments. Or I can sideboard in Rouse, and use that as my way to pull ahead. On the flip side of that, if you're attacking their graveyard, well, now my accumulated wisdom is anticipate, and my combustion techniques are, a little worse, and if it's Soul Guide Lantern, maybe I have to bait you out by casting one and then responding by casting another one. So I draw 3 cards and then resolve my anticipate, but I still got my value out of it, and you kind of spend a card and sit there awkwardly. So it's hard to attack as a strategy, and it moves through so many cards that a lot of its cards aren't necessarily ever even really dead. So it is really consistent and really powerful. It's very rewarding for the players who I think put in a lot of time to understand all the matchups. And we see that every week. I think we've seen it for a while, every week, right since Worlds. It's just been a really solid, good deck. Even if it does struggle with, or it can be exploited based on how it's being built, right? Like, I think it was much better prepared for Prowess. People put in a couple more removal spells, had better plans for that deck compared to kind of being focused on Lessons, Mirrors, and Landfall in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that all sort of checks out to me. I think like another thing too that we really should harp more on that you mentioned at the top there is this idea of like you should be bolting people more, right? Like the deal 3 mode, like if I told you could draw and cast Lava Spike, would you do that? If you could also do that like on all of your turns, like once you set up the artist talent, is something that is a real like difference maker. Like I watched Jacob Pablo play a lot of this deck in the Spellbomb Discord. Like he will stream the deck deafened, and he's done very well a lot of challenges. Lost playing to the Pro Tour with another Spellbomb member playing his deck, and they had practiced together back at the last RC, right? Like this deck is very good, and one of the big differences is like he's drawing a lot of cards, don't get me wrong, but his second mode so often is deal 3, and then he's really good at identifying, okay, it's time to start dealing 3 and foregoing the cards and realizing like, okay, I have a clear path to victory, I just need to 3 them out enough here, or / like, okay, drawing cards isn't going to work here, I just need to keep drawing Lava Spikes and casting them via the discard deal 3. And it is a big difference maker in this deck is how somebody uses their monument. It's a really high skill testing card, I think, despite having only 3 modes, and often you getting all 3 modes when you're really humming.
Yeah, it's about the times where you don't get all 3 modes that it
Yep.
really makes a difference. And a lot of the times with people having that deck in their sites, you don't.
Yep, super true. All right, last but not least here is Mono Green Landfall. This is a deck you mentioned that if you had had more time, you probably would have ended up playing. This is a deck I really like. I think it and Rakdos Monument, which is not on our power rankings at all here, were two of the decks that I were highest on going to this weekend. I had a friend who she was playing this event. She had not had much time to practice, and I told her to play Landfall. She ended up switching to Lessons in day 2 and having a fine finish. But this was a deck that, like, at least to me, is one of the better, like, proactive decks in the format, and really good at putting people to a test, and actually has like a lot of different ways you can build and present your deck. We saw the Spotlight get one with no Sapperling Nurseries, and I know there are other people who are on a similar idea, especially at the European RC. And I don't know, this deck is just very impressive. There's a lot of different threats you can play. You have a good, like, powerful proactive game plan, and you weirdly kind of present like a lot of different combos that all kind of interlock together. Like Ice Tail Explorer plus Sapperling Nursery is like this weird combo, and then like Sapperling Nursery plus Green Shell, if you do, that's a weird combo. And if you have your Might Form plus your Ice Tail, that's a weird combo, right? Like, you do a lot of value, and you're a Badgermole Cup deck, but you're also a Badgermole Cup deck in a very different way than everyone else, where like a fine fail case for you is like target my fetch land just to get another landfall trigger, right? Like having it be this sort of, okay, I can use it to get a landfall trigger and then use it again to go fetch another land. Not always the best way to play it, but it's like a real part of this card, and something that, different than the Bant Rhythm deck, but also just like, okay, Badgermole Cub is this real threat in this different way, and you killing it right away might actually even be bad for you because you need to save that seer for my Ice Tail in a couple turns. So I don't know. I've been very impressed by this deck. It's weird, don't get me wrong, and there's some games you play and you're just kind of like, ugh, what am I doing compared to everyone else? They're draw 3ing and casting a million spells per turn, but it's really, really strong.
Yeah, I think that for me, the reason that I wound up getting scared off the deck was that there are such an abundance of options for how to build it, and so many different ways that you can kind of configure and construct your plans. And that was really daunting to try to approach without a lot of time. And that really is a testament to the strength of the deck, right? Like, you can build it to be advantaged in so many ways, or build so many different plans into your deck, because all of its cards are so strong. So, like, Sapling Nursery is a card that in a lot of matchups people realized maybe they don't want it, and some people are like, well, by having this, I have a different angle in the mirror match. I'm able to kind of overwhelm some decks that otherwise have no way to beat this. Like, I know I played a lot of games of Spellmentals against Landfall for the benefit of the people I was working with, and like, that card, very good in that matchup, but also in hearing about the results from it otherwise, like, maybe not so good there. There were new cards that had come out that seemed like, oh, maybe this is a good plan for the Landfall deck, but how do you even fit them in? To the people who really solved that and figured out how they want to present their basic forests, they were really rewarded. I mean, this deck had the most top 8s. It really did make, Landfall and Lessons, I think, really are the two decks that made good on their metagame share in terms of their conversion rate on the power rankings. Landfall by twice the points of Lessons, right? Like, just think about that. Both those two decks were 2 of the top 3 decks played, not by some insane margin either. It was pretty level there. It's not like there were twice as many Landfall players as Lessons players in many events, I don't think. But it still took up twice as many points with nearly twice as many top 8s. And I think that says something about just how resilient the deck is. It was the known, kind of, really, if you go back all the way to the rhythm decks coming out, right? Like before Rhythm came out, the Landfall decks were winning everything online. And then people were like, how do I beat the Landfall deck? Well, I turbo Craterhoof Behemoth them. Then the format realized that, well, we have to beat that. And so people started playing Thunderflocks because that card even came out, right? Lorwyn comes out and there's new options. Landfall is just still here. It's still incredibly strong and incredibly good. And Mightform Harmonizer plus Escape Tunnel presents a really good way to close games that go too long with like bossing, say. Like I said, there's a ton of different mid-range packages you can play. And the deck also has some pretty fast draws and can present some pretty fast draws with decks that don't have too much interaction with like Mossborn Hydras and these doublers and their Sasha's Chocobos, right? Like they can be a quick deck to take over. Earthbender's Ascension is a fantastic card that does a lot to punch through in these board stalls as well, and it has, I think, the best inevitability outside of maybe Lessons, but it's also the hardest inevitability to disrupt because it often does it just with a land or two and drawing the right card, and that makes it really scary. And that, I think, is part of why we see it right here firmly at the top of the metagame, which is exactly what I think I expected to see. A lot of this deck doing really well because people knew it was going to be there, and it was, a lot of the best deck doing well in Milwaukee as well.
Mm. Yeah, deck is very, very strong. And you get that inevitability in combination with Llanowar Elf starts, right? And that's really powerful, I think. That pinch is something that's hard for players to overcome. That does it for the point breakdown. Abe, I mentioned in passing Rakdos Monument. That was a deck that I thought was quite good that did not make our top 10. Is there any deck here that jumped out to you that you thought was good that you're surprised not to see make it?
Honestly, no. I think this is a really good representation of like what the metagame looks like. And I think that for the next month and a half, while this is what we have, like if you just work off of this to kind of determine what do I expect people to play, you'll be in a pretty good spot.
I agree. All right, that's going to do it for our main topic. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/ccmtg. One of the benefits of becoming a patron is being able to ask a question during our Patreon question segment. And Ash says, Mason and Abe, how much time are you dedicating to Magic? So I assume this question just meant like in general, but maybe also prep. I don't think there's really a wrong way to take it unless we completely butchered what you meant here, Ash. And if so, our mistake. For me, Abe, when it comes to like, coaching and like commentary and stuff like that, which is where a lot of my time is being spent at the moment, I would say I'm spending about, 6 to 8 hours a week personally playing Magic. And then there's also just, like I mentioned earlier, like I watch a lot of the Spellbound people play their challenges or testing. I'll watch a good amount of that. And then also clients, doing VOD review and things like that. So that's my answer. There are some times where it's a lot more, like post Pro Tour, I was like locked in, playing a lot of Standard, watching a lot of Standard, really trying to catch up on everything, and then this week I'm probably playing slightly less Standard. I want to play a lot of this Momo deck. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty new, but I wouldn't say I'm dedicating, like 15, 16 hours or anything like that to Magic. But also, I've never been that way. That's one of the things I talk a lot about in coaching is that, I've always been someone that's like 8 to 10 hours on average. And sometimes it's a lot more. In conversations too, it kind of blurs the line. Like there's a lot of combos that happen that like nickel and dime some time up here. But, generally speaking, I would say I'm still kind of rocking around there. What about you, Abe?
Yeah, I would say in an average week, I'm probably, if we don't count recording the podcast, and we don't count, it's hard to count the time I spend on lunch breaks, like catching up on Discord and talking to people. But the time that I spend outside of like those moments, average week is probably like 5 hours, maybe. And that's usually like an hour a night, maybe, of like either playing games or reviewing games or, reviewing other people's games, really being intent about it, or maybe a 2 to 3 hour session once or twice a week. When I'm really locked in for an event and have been able to do the requisite prioritizing of my time, I would say it's probably closer to 10 to 15, depending. If I've really blocked off time, I might be playing for 15 to 20, but that would be for Pro Tour weeks or Pro Tours where I'm preparing for, RCs I'm preparing for, where I'm also working during the week. So I'm spending coming home, getting ready for sitting down and playing for 3 to 4 hours intently, or working on something for 3 to 4 hours intently every night of the week.
Yeah, and I think this is a really potentially helpful thing for some people to hear, because I think a lot of people worry that the only way they can get to the Pro Tour is if they're constantly spending 4 or 5 hours a day playing Magic, right? I bring this up a lot in coaching, but I joke about, our friend Misplaced Ginger. And I think people see him and they're they have to do something maybe not as extreme as him, right? He's playing 8 hours of Magic a day or whatever. And part of that's because it's his job. But they think that that's what you need to do to make the PT. And I think that, there are times where you need to put a lot of time in, right? You're saying actively testing for the PT, testing for the RC. But besides that, I think, you don't need to be spending this absurd amount of time testing in order to be on top of things and be ready to win your local RCQ. And in fact, I would say a lot of times it's better for you to spend an hour, a day being really intent, really focused and doing something, and then spending the rest of the time hanging out with friends on Discord or your partner or watching a TV show and relaxing and just being really focused with your testing and really precise and getting high quality game or two and reviewing those, thinking about those games, that it is for you to jam 3 or 4 hours, of half-minded Magic and, trying to draw conclusions from that.
Yeah, if you play 2 matches a day, thinking that you're playing the finals of the Pro Tour and you can take it that seriously, you will probably improve faster than if you play, matches a day and are just kind of jamming. That's for sure.
Yeah,
there really is a differential on the time given.
Yeah, every client I have, Abe, who has adopted the 1 or 2 playing for my life games of Magic, right? They are all the ones who have, I don't want to say all, but they have all shown massive improvements from where they were before at every stage of it, right? For people who are new and really just getting into competitive Magic, I've seen them rocket up, relatively speaking, and people who have maybe been playing for a long time and sort of hit a plateau point, they have also sort of skyrocketed, relative to where they were, and kind of break through a glass ceiling that they had. It really matters. And honestly, too, if you just think about it objectively, which would you rather have, right? 1 or 2 really good testing sessions, right? Where you're really focused playing your best, or do you want to have a lot of bad data where you're kind of absentmindedly playing and drawing conclusions and you didn't play your best and you missed some stuff and you're having to you know what I mean? It just sort of makes sense to me that high intensity, high focus games are going to lead to better results and better, conclusions, or I should say data sets to draw off of.
Yeah, exactly.
Next up is always improving. This is the point of the show. If we want to try and get better in life or Magic in general. And Abe, you did the solo episode last week, which was great, but I want to let you go first here. What was your always improving moment this week?
Yeah, my always improving moment this week actually came from something we already talked about a little bit, but that decision to change decks. It has been a long time since I felt uncomfortable with what I was going to play leading into a tournament. And normally, I don't know, I felt like I might have normally just priced myself into just playing green because I knew it was the best deck. And just identifying early enough on that I was not going to get to where I wanted to be or felt like I was going to need to be comfortable playing the deck, and also being able to speak to what that would be, right? When I was asked why I didn't play green by a friend of mine, I said, well, I know myself, and I know that I currently don't have a real understanding of why all of my cards are here and what they're trying to accomplish and what game plans I'm supposed to be going for in all of the matchups I'm going to play. And as much as I think I could navigate a lot of games really well, and I think that a lot of people who maybe even had success with Landfall this weekend might not have been able to answer those things as well. They might have been able to intuit them better because they have more reps with the deck, but also they're not me. And I know myself, and I know that where I tend to win games and where I, look to win games is in that kind of knowledge a lot of the time. And when I have that, I tend to perform a lot better than when I don't. So just being able to really take a step back and look at like, where do I need to be to feel comfortable succeeding in this event, and where am I, and kind of putting two and two together there was a big help. As much as I didn't have the result that maybe I was hoping for or that I wanted, I didn't even have really a particularly strong result. I went 4-4 and dropped in the event. It wasn't like I had some sort of close call finish or a day 2 fizzle out, but I was still really happy with the decision that I'd made, because I knew that I was not going to make, like, even if I'd made a better run with the green deck, I wouldn't have done it for like a better reason. Like, I was definitely more comfortable in the games I was playing and playing better. I think playing the Spellmentals deck than I would have played the Landfall deck.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reflection. I liked a lot of what you said there, but I loved what you said of I win the games in this way, or this is where I look to get my edges, and understanding your strengths and like also how you play and where you're normally winning, and realizing that you're not there with that deck, right? And so it's like I need to kind of back up a little bit, right? Like I'm kind of maybe trapping myself. I think it's really good. I think sort of understanding like, wait, I normally play in this way, and yes, theoretically it'd be great if I could, not have to rely on this, or if I could just pick up the green deck and do it, but I need to probably pivot because I'm not there and I'm not going to be able to play well enough. And this is another really good deck. I think is a great sort of moment and a great realization thing. And I think this is what healthy metagames give. Like I feel so bad because before this metagame for a year, it was like, listen, theoretically, there should be lots of decks you can play, but it's a one deck metagame really, or maybe a 2-deck metagame, right? Play Omniscience or Corey Steelcutter, play Vivi, play Nadu, that kind of thing. But this healthy metagame, it's like, yeah, you can play Izzet Spellmentals. Like it is totally reasonable. It is a good deck. Did you think Landfall was the best deck? Yes, but I think if you thought Landfall was the best deck the way Vivi was, you would just powered through it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it was that level of different, I would have found a way, but I felt like it was pretty close, and I felt like it wasn't going to be such a wrong decision that, I was going to wind up regretting it in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's like a huge thing to identify. Speaking of regretting, so my always remembering moment kind of came from, I mentioned it earlier, where it was like I almost last second kind of like went to the spotlight in Richmond, and it was just like gonna game or whatever, but I decided to stay home and do some stuff for both my birthday and also my younger brother's birthday. And I say the word younger brother, he's 16 now, which is shows how old I am or whatever, since I was about his age when he was born. And the snowstorms kind of made it where it wasn't possible for us to celebrate his birthday and to like, I was working the pro tour, and if you don't know, like Tennessee got hit pretty bad by those snowstorms a month ago. Like where he lives, my parents, like they lost power for 2 weeks. Like they were living in like a hotel basically for a little bit. Before they eventually got into a house they could stay at for the remainder until their house is back up. And it was one of those things where I kind of like almost last second went, and I could have messaged my parents and messaged my brother and been like, hey, this is like a work thing in a way, right? / see my friends. I get to see you and so many other people, and I can swing this. I can drive this thing, I can do this. They're not going to care. But I was like, no, this I think matters more, right? Like if I thought that this other thing mattered more to both like my career and where I was at in life, I would have done it and I think it would have been okay. But I really took like a second to think about it and thought, no, my brother's 16th birthday matters more. Spending time with him matters more. He's about to go off to college in a few years. He's actually going to Spain for a week. He's coming in a day or two here, doing a school thing because he's doing so well with music and stuff like that. And he's doing a little mini tour, right? And it's like, I want to be there and spend some time with him. And I think I value this more than going to this spotlight. And I don't regret that. Like once I made the decision, I had peace with it and spending time with him and, creating these memories. And even though it was just a couple hours, it was not like we spent a whole day or a whole weekend. It was still the right thing for me and really cemented that, like, there's so much more to life than Magic. And you know what, Abe? There's still going to be another spotlight. I'm still going to play the RC in DC, right? Or Cincinnati, I guess, whichever one I end up going to. Like, it's going to be okay. There's going to be more Magic. And there might not be as more times where it's easy and convenient for us to just sync up and talk about these things. And I'm really glad I made this decision. And so that was my always improving moment this week.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, there's only one 16th birthday. Mm-hmm. There's definitely going to be another spotlight Richmond. I'd bet my bottom dollar.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I had my third 30th birthday now. So they're probably going to have a fourth one of those. So it's not like that's a big deal. Jokes aside. That is going to do it for this week's episode. You should check out the sponsors of this show. Untapped.gg is a free arena deck tracker. It will track your win-loss. It will record your games for you with the free version. I want to make this clear. I've done it personally. You can download Untapped.gg, use the free model, and then when you play your games on Arena Abe, you can go back and review them. Reviewing your games is the number one thing that Magic players are not doing to improve. We have said this 1,000 times. We've done this episode, I think, 4 different times, Abe, since you've joined the podcast over the last 4 years. We bring it up all the time. It is the number one thing you should be doing. If Arena is your main way of playing Magic and you want to improve for RCQs and RCs and just in general, download this app. It's free. We get a little small kickback for, you just downloading the free version, and you can get that recording and not have to worry about it and click through there. It is super awesome. I maybe just need to record a video showing people how to do this and put it up on the YouTube channel so they get the idea. Untapped.gg, the link in the description for the show. And then check out the swag store. That link is in the description below as well. You can get your Abe Stein 2026 co-host of the year shirts. We've seen a couple of those fly around, a couple stickers. It's super awesome to see that and see y'all loving the merch in that way. That's a great way to support our show. And then Mana Traders as well. I believe it should be code CCMTG March 3 or March 26. We changed the way we're doing the codes. Whichever way, the correct code will be in the bottom. I'm not sure if maybe next month that's where it's starting, trying to have a better system for y'all since we are forced to sort of change the code monthly. In case you're wondering why the code's always different, that's just something that Mana Traders thinks is best for their, system. So we work with them in that regard, and Mana Traders is the best way to play Magic the Gathering online, which is one of the best ways to test lots of different decks for very, very cheap with their rental service. So consider checking that out if you're someone who wants to try lots of different decks at a much lower cost than Arena. You can join the show via the YouTube comment section. We love to check those out. Sometimes we read them on the show. You can tweet at the show at CCMTG. If you have something you want to say about the show, we always love feedback, both good and bad. Things you love, things you hate, we love to hear it. And you can follow me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. If you want to reach out for coaching, you can via that same Twitter or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. I have some openings up right now, and so it's a great time to get in if you're wanting to start preparation for your RC, especially if you want to work on bigger picture topics. Now is the time to do it. And you can catch me with this guy this weekend on the NRG stream, Saturday, March 14th. We are going to be covering the first half of the team tournament with my boy Abe Stein. Abe, it's been like a year and a half since we were together. We had you join the NRG coverage for Champs. Last year, you sort of saved my life as we had a bunch of people sick, so thank you for that. And I'm excited to commentate with you this weekend. It's going to be a blast.
Oh, yeah. I am very much looking forward to it. The last time we did coverage was so fun, and I love bringing Magic to life, so it's going to be great to do it again, and again, talking to Mason about Magic every week. It feels like at least once.
Yeah. Can't escape it. Abe, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
People can find me over at Blue Sky at More Nothings. You can DM me there if you're interested in coaching, or you can reach out to me at my email, morenothings@gmail.com. Just put coaching in the description. Mason, how about you?
Yep. And I guess I'll make a note. I already sort of said that, but we'll have Spencer edit out here at 104.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
You're good. No. I threw you a curveball there. That's on me. All right, 104. I'm going to say 30, and then I'll start talking in a second. That will do it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much. We hope things are going well for you, Spencer. You can find him at Heezy Gaming on everywhere, basically. We'll see you next week for another episode of CC MTG.